So this question is always interesting because like the intro or the bio that I give is very much dependent on the context. Um, but if I were to start as early as relevant, I think one thing that I have been thinking about a lot lately is that I have actually been interested in tech and maybe entrepreneurship more broadly for longer than I give myself credit for. There was a time in sixth and seventh grade where I was, teaching myself how to code. I started building websites in high school. Um, I remember my freshman or sophomore year in high school, the current founder of the browser company was working on a product called Branch, and it was basically trying to solve this problem of having more productive conversations on the internet.
Hmm.
And I just thought this was fascinating, and I emailed him like 47 times, and then he wasn't responding. So I tried to build a competitor, and I had no idea what I was doing. Um, but in hindsight, all of these dots began to connect when I was in college, and I was like, oh, maybe I haven't been interested in tech this entire time. But for me at the time, it was just these are people doing cool things. I want to do cool things like them. I didn't really put it into the category of I want to be a technologist. I want to work in this industry, whatever it might be. Um, until I got to college, a buddy and I started this company um, called AMA, and we were helping creators like YouTubers between 500,000 and 10 million subscribers grow their audience, make more money. Sort of just happened upon the opportunity. There was a basketball YouTuber that we both followed in high school that was popping off a little bit. And we had taken this data analytics class and realized that YouTube had a ton of data on the back end that creators just weren't looking at. And we realized we were able to answer questions like how should you title your thumbnails? How should you title your videos? What should your thumbnails look like? How should your content calendar be structured? And increase views and CPMs by considerable margins. And for a creator that's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on YouTube ad revenue, that was pretty substantial cash that we were able to bring in. So did that for a few years. And the problems that I found working closely with creators are how I ended up getting into crypto. So as that company winded down, I went headfirst down the NFT rabbit hole around the time of NBA Top Shot. Found myself working with a few DAOs, the early social DAO days like Kraus House, Forefront, Seed Club, etc.
Like
And
2021 time frame, something like that.
end of 2020, beginning of 2021.
Okay.
Uh, and then started just working full time in crypto more broadly. I didn't really have a role. I just knew I was not an engineer, but I was trying to become more technical. But I found myself just doing a little bit of everything: BD, GTM, sales, writing, whatever was asked of me, product. And as I was bouncing between roles and companies, I found myself getting pulled into more and more writing work. I had a blog, I had a newsletter, like I was trying to publish on a more consistent basis myself, and that was always something I loved to do. Um, but B, even for in the roles that I was taking on where I wasn't necessarily initially asked to do writing, I was being pulled into that work either because it was a need for the company or because I was finding opportunities where I think thought it would be valuable. Um, I was working full time at Forefront through 2023, and at the end of the year, the Forefront winded down, and I found myself looking for a new opportunity, and I just started freelancing while I was looking for a full time job. And again, I found myself in this situation where people were asking me to write. And I had three projects back to back where the deliverable that we landed on was let's write the foundational essay for this company
Hmm.
so we can both align internally on team product strategy, all that good stuff, but then also externally, from a marketing perspective. And I was like, this is not only a really really fun exercise, but the fact that three people, like in after conversations about like what I could do that would be valuable, three different projects landed on that outcome. Maybe there's something here. So I started trying to sell that just as a package, like, hey, founder that I am friends with, I could write the pillar essay for your company. And it was a pretty appealing package to a lot of different founders. And I realized it was sort of a wedge for a lot of different things. It was a tangible output that people can hang their hat on and say like, hey, this is content, this could bring in leads, this is going to get more eyeballs on our company. But also B, it was a wedge to do brand strategy and brand positioning and, you know, all this sort of work that is very fluffy, and a lot of founders maybe scoff at if they hear the terms, but when actually given tangible results that turn out to be effective, they're like, oh wait, this is important. And that's how Native came to be. So that's sort of the story. It was the long road of realizing I was interested in technology, but realizing I also wasn't the best engineer and didn't really want to go down that route, and finding out that writing in the context of this industry is actually really important and really impactful. And I'm sure we'll chat about it in many different ways, but that's where I find myself today.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, and I like how you know, the organic way in which Native came to be, basically from these three different situations, all leading to the same deliverable or like area in which these founders thought you could be most useful. It's like, it would be surprising enough if like 2 out of 3 landed in the same place and 1 was like kind of tangential, but for like 3 for 3, all in the same place, I definitely think that's sort of like a sign worth listening to. Was one of those the higher green paper, or was that something after?
No, that was completely separate. They were, so funny enough, one of the things I'm realizing is that if you say you're doing design and, you know, brand work more broadly, companies are more likely to be able to say like, yes, you could talk about this, use us as a case study, be public. But if I'm saying, hey, I'm writing this essay, and this essay, even if I'm not writing it myself, you know, I'm co-writing it with the founders, the essay is supposed to be coming from the founder.
Right.
A lot of folks just don't want you to say that you worked on it. So
Right.
it's been a situation that I found myself in where I'm like, how do I produce case studies for work that is I'm, you know, working on in quote unquote secrecy? And
Yeah.
slowly found ways around that a bit. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that is kind of a hard problem, I guess. I guess you could maybe sort of ask permission to, you know, I understand where the founders are coming from on that. Like, I think it is actually important for it to come off as like authentically from the founder. And like in a lot of cases, it is sort of like a, you know, a collaboration, but just by saying it's by anything but like purely the founder can maybe be sort of a negative thing for them. But maybe they would be open to like, you know, you can say that you're behind things in like private, you know, audio conversations, but you can't like tweet that, you know, you were part of it or whatever. Like private conversations for the purpose of, you know, getting new clients or something like that. I don't know. It's maybe some of them will be like more flexible for something like that. But more generally, I'm curious. Like, obviously, you've sort of landed in this writing realm now, and you mentioned, you know, you were writing a lot previously, had a newsletter, but have you been like, what's the history of your writing habit? Like, have you been you know, are you like a guy who like journals a lot, or were you interested in writing like as a kid? Like, is writing something you've been doing for a long time, or it's more of a, you know, more of a recent thing that you've gone into?
So that's a great question. So earliest writing that I did was definitely just journaling as a kid. Like I remember in middle school, I had a notebook and I would just crank through those pretty quickly for no other reason than like I don't think I was really journaling about my feelings so much as I just had lots of ideas, or I just wanted to sit down and brainstorm, or, you know, I was planning some really big project that I didn't end up actually executing on, but I started writing about, and I would have notebooks filled with these things. And then in high school, I got into debates, and I think that was really where I realized I was pretty good at writing with a specific purpose in mind. The research required to like win a debate, and then, you know, crafting a case that actually convinces people of your point, I think were invaluable skills that carried with me even today. And I think that's where my love for writing really came from. And then through college, I think every year I was starting a newsletter, and then it would die down after a few months, and then I would start another one. I think the longest streak I had of weekly posting was maybe 5 or 6 months. But every year I would come back to it. And today I think it's more one-off essays. I do a lot of mini essays on social media. And then I have an Obsidian vault that I just have a daily note that I write in for like 30, 40 minutes every single morning. That ends up being, it goes in a million directions. It could be just, here's what I'm doing today, and let me just get all my thoughts on paper. It could be, here's this problem that I have in my life that I need to think through. It could be business planning. It could be, writing a draft for an essay that I have in mind. But it's just getting words on paper every single morning. And I find myself, even if it feels unproductive, coming back to that work months later and saying, oh, wow, like I have the source material for a really good essay that I want to write here. And I didn't even realize months ago.
How long have you had that habit with the Obsidian?
That's been about 2 years at least.
Wow. And like almost literally every day?
Almost literally. I've definitely missed days. Like if I'm,
Traveling
just
or whatever.
my computer or traveling or on like there's a gap, but never more than maybe a 4-day gap, I would say.
Yeah, that's super impressive. The consistency of it. I know like when I started blogging, I wanted to publish something every weekday. So, 5 days a week. And I was doing that for like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months. And it's really tough. Like writing is just, you can't just like necessarily sit down and bang it out. Like it's just a tough activity. Like that's why I think you learn about like these sort of authors or writers, and they talk about working like 2 or 3, maybe 4 hours a day at most, just because of like the brain power that it takes to like actually be writing is very different from if you're doing maybe like a more objective task or like clicking buttons and whatnot. Have you thought about, or have you, or if not, have you thought about sharing these Obsidian? Like, obviously, you mentioned some of them ends up being the seeds of essays or the drafts of essays, but have you thought about more regularly sharing these publicly, or are there specific reasons you might not want to?
I specifically don't share. Well, like I said, some of them end up getting shared publicly. Like a lot of the screenshot essays and stuff that I'll do on Warpcast or Twitter end up just being slightly edited versions of whatever I wrote that morning. And it's just something top of mind that I want to just get out really quickly. But a tweet or a thread is not really the shape of the idea that I think is most conducive. But in general, if I write with the intention of publishing, to your point about, writing is really difficult. It's really hard to have a cadence of publishing every day. It's just much less stream of consciousness and much less authentic. And I become much more conscious of the way that ideas are being articulated and whether what I'm saying is actually true and whether I've researched it enough and all of these different things. Whereas if I'm just saying, hey, this is going to live in the Obsidian Vault, this is just for me, I write much more consistently and with much higher volume. So to answer your question directly, I don't ever write with the intention of publishing any of these Obsidian notes, but some of them end up getting published, maybe with very little editing, just depending on what it is that I wrote that day and whether I feel like it should see light.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of these things that I sort of have, I don't know, I always seem to come back to is this just concept of basically being like default public with whether it's, writing or texting or, audio or like we're doing now. Like this could have been a, one-on-one conversation. Like if I had reached out and asked to just have a call, like, you might have said yes, we might have been doing pretty much the same thing, but not sharing it. But I like this. I like just default public. Obviously, there are some things that need to be private, and I totally take your point that if knowing that something is public changes the, the content, like what you're, the way that you're approaching the thing, then like it can definitely be, that can be a negative. Like you're writing for this specific purpose, and that purpose is not to make it something that's like, you're not thinking about anyone reading it and everything like that. And suddenly you introduce that, and like you lose this ability to do this writing that has been so enjoyable and sounds like just generally positive for you over the last couple of years. So I totally get that. And like, you don't want to sacrifice that. I wonder, like in this case, if like what, you know, when I started writing, it was, I had no audience. So I was able to sort of share whatever without really thinking about it. And unfortunately, you know, you lose that over time as you have, even if you have like a very small following, even if you know like 10 or 20 people are going to read something, it's like, that's enough that it definitely changes the approach, unfortunately, or you know, it just is what it is. But I wonder, like, it could be interesting to have like another pseudonym that you create or something, where which just sort of like publishes these things into the void. It's completely unattached. Well, I guess, you know, you would then have to filter for like your company name and stuff like that, like things that could identify you. But just something like that. I basically feel like there's always, like, I'm sure there would be great value that people could get from having access to your Obsidian posts, but unfortunately, it's just not as simple as like you can just share freely without it changing any parts of the equation.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about this a lot. Like you and others who've experimented with publishing consistently other pseudonyms have definitely led me to think about whether it would be a good fit for me. And part of me has just wanted to, you know, create a pseudonym, go out into the world, start publishing, see what happens. I I can't give you a good reason as to why I haven't tried it, other than every time I come every time the idea comes to mind, I sort of just sit and say, hey, but I could be writing more under my own name. Like this is just an excuse.
Right.
But I think it is a very legitimate option that would probably increase my output, but also to your point, the output might be beneficial to a wider range of people. I think one other thing that comes to mind here is, so I've also begun publishing what I'm calling like a homies newsletter. And it's basically just a monthly email that I send out to mutuals that has, you know, a little bit more personal thoughts, but then also, you know, updates on my business and requests for help and all of these different things. And even just thinking about the type of writing that I want to do there versus the type of writing that I do more publicly, sure, there's maybe 50 people or potentially going to be 100 people on this newsletter, but just the fact that I know who every single person on this newsletter is versus the uncertainty of just posting and not knowing who is going to see it also decreases the mental barrier for me to decide like what it is that I'm going to write and why, right? I'm much less, I guess, embarrassed to write when I know who the people are. Whereas the uncertainty is the thing that I actually think keeps me from being more, the word authentic is the one word that comes to mind, but I think unfiltered, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's been something that I've been playing with as well. Like, how big can an audience of people that I actually know get before my filter comes back into play?
Yeah, I saw this. Now that you're mentioning it, I remember seeing, I think you cast about it. And this was like, I think it was, the cast might have said something like it's almost like a personal investor update sort of thing. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And so what was the like impetus for doing that?
Impetus on that end was primarily selfish purposes. Like I needed a way to, you know, tap into and leverage my network for the purposes of, you know, bouncing ideas, getting new clients and leads and those sorts of things. But also, you know, there were things that I wanted to talk about and put into words and share with my friends. And, you know, I don't do the best job of calling all of my friends on a regular basis, or even just like, you know, folks who I haven't seen in a while, but when we talk, it's always a good conversation, just keeping them
Mm-hmm.
life. So this was an opportunity to just say, hey, let me just talk about the things that are top of mind for me. And if my friends want to read them, they can. And if they don't want to read them, that's totally fine. But I had a couple of friends who started doing this and put me on the email list. And maybe we weren't that close, or we were close once and haven't been recently. And really enjoyed getting these newsletters, and I would read them top to bottom every single time I got them. You know, maybe I would respond to 75% of the editions that came out. And I think it made us closer, and it gave me a new lens on what was happening in their life that, you know, for one reason or another, I just wasn't getting otherwise. So that was the inspiration on that end, just heading into the new year. And I think, one edition down, it has already like done wonders, not even from a professional sense, but just personally. I feel like it sparked 2 or 3 conversations with friends and mutuals that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you get one sort of valuable thing every few of those, it's probably valuable just the process of putting it together in the first place to give yourself clarity on, progress, things that you could use some help with, just general reflection and update and stuff. And then if you get some sort of positive outcomes from that as well, or relationships that get stronger, like it sounds like just a very positive thing. It sounds interesting enough that I can like kind of see it being obviously worthwhile as something like for me to do myself. And my only reason not to is basically the reason that everyone has for not doing anything, which is just like, the default is not to do it. But it sounds like a great thing to be doing. And I know like people always talk, like investors always talk very positively about investor updates, which to me has always seemed like, I don't know, I have this whole thing with fundraising and all that it's like, I feel like a large part of being a founder is to be your own boss, and the flavor of, and to have the freedom to work on whatever you want basically, and make the, executive decisions and whatnot. And the flavor in our corner of the world of being a founder is basically raising money. I know you're not doing this, or at least I understand that you're not doing this with Native, so maybe we could talk about that. But it's like, it just seems to me that, even just the expectation of having to send like a monthly investor update, it's like, what if that's not the best thing for me to be doing right now, like for what I'm working on, or like, I don't know. It's just, I'm very, maybe to a fault, like averse at this point, or at least not averse, but very hesitant. I'd be very hesitant to like raise money for anything. But I also see all of these people raising money for all of these things, and like it seems to go pretty well. It's like, even if the company fails, it's not on your dime, and like you're probably going to be fine. And like they might even just invest again, because failing in entrepreneurship is not really failing like necessarily. I mean, at least you went for it and you got some experience and you learned some things from it. So I wonder sometimes if this bit of aversion to raising capital is one of the more basically something that is not smart that I'm doing. I don't know how you feel about it. I saw something recently. Where was it? It must have just been in sort of some of your early casts about Native that I don't think you're planning on like doing any fundraising. And it seems like more of a services thing that you wouldn't necessarily fundraise for, or at least it wouldn't be as obvious to fundraise for anyway. But I don't know if you have thoughts on this, especially having, done some companies in the past as well.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think first and foremost, I think people forget that venture, the results and outcomes of venture capital as an industry are significantly delayed, in that, whatever is happening now is not actually going to be seen in the results of venture funding for another 5 to 10 years. And I think we came off COVID and, the world of zero interest rates, and we said, okay, the world is going to, return to sanity. And in our sense, sanity, and the sense of technology more broadly, sanity was, we're only going to fund things that are actually creating value and have the potential to drive revenue, and we're going to be a little bit more picky about valuations and all this good stuff. And I actually think that's the wrong way to understand where we're at right now. I don't think 2025 is even close to being what 2010 was or 2015 was. I think 2025 is actually a world where there are very few things that require venture funding, and we are still funding a lot of things that don't require, right? In my mind, you need venture capital funding if speed is an absolute necessity. So being first to market is, a reason that you're going to win. And I actually don't think that's the case for the vast majority of things. Or B, you need massive capital upfront that you're not going to be able to drive through revenue. And I don't think that's necessarily true for most things either. You could make the case that it's true for like foundational models, hard tech companies, defense. There's very few industries where that's still maybe true, but for the vast majority of software, it's definitely not. So I think there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? There's definitely VCs who are continuing to fund software that would have been an effective investment 10 years ago and are doing it at lower valuations and more efficiently. And that's how they're justifying to themselves that it's a good thing and they're doing it the right way. And in reality, they just shouldn't be funding these things at all. And it's going to bite a lot of people in the butt 5-10 years from now, maybe even sooner. For the purposes of native and just
Can I actually interject on the general concept, and then before we get to native, sort of like a question there. So, what was I gonna say? So I think you highlighted very clearly, and I tend to agree with you on sort of like the couple of main reasons why, where venture capital is needed and makes sense. But do you have thoughts on like there's the VC perspective and then there's the founder perspective. And from the founder perspective, there's, do we need capital? But then within, like basically if the answer to that is no, there's still a reasonable, potentially reasonable answer where no, we don't need capital for this software business. However, I'm going to quit my job to pursue this. I'm used to making X salary and my cost of living is Y. And so I certainly don't need a ton of capital to start this business, but I need, at least it would be helpful for me to be able to commit, Z amount of time to this for which to live comfortably, I sort of need this. And so, maybe raising money, even though I don't need to for this business in particular, like for my personal runway or to be able to hire up a very small team of, even if it's just 2 or 3 people or whatever, like it might make sense to raise even if I don't need to. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, and what do you think of that? Because that would be more so where like nothing that I'm thinking of doing or have been doing is in that category that you described of like, I'm not trying to build the next OpenAI. I'm not building hard tech. I'm not doing like defense systems, anything like that. However, I'm spending my own money to give myself the freedom to work on what I want to work on. And I see other people raising money to do things, not so different. And I just want, my sense is that that's not what I want to do for a variety of reasons. But I sometimes, like, I think it's, this is totally, unrelated point, but just to sort of explain the concept, like one of these other sort of decisions that I've sort of made and just stuck with for a very long time that I'm aware is like, okay, this is a decision that I sort of made and consider set, similar to like, I'm not going to raise money, that could like I should revisit from time to time because it's very consequential. So an example of that is like, when I was in college, like a lot of people around me taking Adderall and Vyvanse and whatnot, and people taking it around exams and whatever, and I tried it here and there during like exams or whatever, but I was never like consistently taking it. And I felt, people talk about side effects or whatever. When I would take it for an exam, like I felt great, like I crushed work, like I didn't really experience much of anything negative, but I just sort of had the sense that like, this is not who I am sober. Like, this is not how I am sober. And so I don't really, even if I can be like more productive, like I don't really want to be like a materially different person day to day for the rest of my life. And second of all, like I just, see the movie Limitless or something like that. It's like, even if I don't have side effects in the near term, this seems just like way too intense of a thing. And so I was just like, when I went to get my first job, like I started in investment banking, pretty intense sort of, job. And I had sort of had a condition for myself during my internship. I was like, I'm not going to take any of this stuff. And like people, like my colleagues, like a lot of them certainly were. And I was like, I'm just not, like, that's just going to be a hard rule for me. If I can't do it without that stuff, then I'm just not going to do it because it's just not worth it. But then I sort of revisit that from time to time. And I really don't think about that one too much. I'm pretty confident in that one individually. But I do think I'm like, man, like where would I be if I was taking Adderall every day? Could be awful, but could be also awesome. I really don't know, and it's just something that I sort of decide on. So anyway, it's very unrelated sort of thing, but similar in VC. It's like, am I doing the wrong? Like, should I just not be so averse to that thing, even if I know to your point that I certainly don't need it for what I'm trying to do here, but is it sort of a good model where VCs or generally investors are putting up a relatively small amount of capital that doesn't make a difference to them for a potentially large outcome so that I don't basically have to bankroll it myself? You know what I mean?
I actually think that was a really good analogy. I have thought about this a lot, and I think specific examples of people in my own life have made me very confident that most, like, it's still in this point, that most founders shouldn't be taking VC. Where to begin? So I think that the excuse of, I make X amount of money in my own job, I have this specific lifestyle that I need to uphold, and I need to raise venture money in order to go take this risk, is really just that, an excuse in most cases, because people are not being creative enough with the ways that they can get their funding, right? I've got a friend who is starting a company, quit his job at, in big tech, and basically started working part-time for a friend's startup so that he could fund his lifestyle in, building his company with the other half of his time, or 70 it is that he's spending. I've got another friend that started a company, bootstrapped out of pocket to get the MVP live, and then in order to grow his team, launched a course, made like $150,000 on the course, and then used that to hire his first employee. I've got another friend who started with services revenue and then used the services revenue to, start building the product. And with the cost of, production coming down and the ability for a solo founder to actually go out and build a really high quality app, much less time and honestly much less skill than it required before, I think those examples are going to become more and more frequent and more prevalent. I also think that the traits of a good founder, some traits of a good founder are, high agency, high resourcefulness, and not taking VC and finding alternate modes of, raising capital are indicative of the fact that you are going to be a good founder. So if I'm a VC, I'm immediately questioning why somebody needs to raise money from me with these other options out on the table. Because if they absolutely need to raise money, despite the fact that these other creative options exist, maybe they're not a founder that I'm going to bet some money on to, actually build a successful company. So I think the rules of the game have definitely changed in the last handful of years. And I am not going to make a categorical statement that VC is always bad and no software founder should ever raise venture funding. I just think that you should take the decision a lot more seriously. And I also think that people underrate having complete independence and having complete autonomy over the company that you're building. And maybe that's another conversation that we can get into, but I think because the norm has been, I'm going to raise a seed round and then figure it out from there, folks have just gotten used to the fact that they do not have complete independence and autonomy over their company. But I think that becomes even more important and high status over the next handful of years. And that's going to be another nudge away from raising funding.
Yeah, that actually ties things together pretty cleanly, because that's sort of where I started by saying, like, I think a large part of, being a founder is to have that complete autonomy. And, the difference between 98% autonomy and 100 is like so big. Like the difference between 98 and 94 is like nothing. but 98 to 100 is like you can make every decision, and therefore you don't have to worry about which decisions you can't make autonomously or whatever. Like you just don't have to think about it. But if you have 98%, it's like, oh, well, this thing I need to run by my investors, or like this thing I need to send an investor update and get a thumbs up or whatever. And it's like, it just compromises the entire thing. And you have to filter your thoughts, almost like what you were saying with the Obsidian earlier. It's like the difference between writing to an audience versus writing for yourself. Like there's just a filter that gets applied where you can't think purely what is the best thing for me to do. You have to always have the sort of filter consideration of like, what are these other people involved going to think? And I think that's, I personally sort of really enjoy the pure autonomy and try to preserve it as much as I can, at least these days. So I definitely sort of sympathize with that view. And it's interesting take as well to say, like, that's probably going to get to be higher status, which will then make it sort of like a more sought after option as well in the years to come. And that makes sense as well. And then I think the last thing, to your point on like creative ways to make money, a lot of people in our corner of the internet with Warpcast, especially, like there's lots of opportunities to make money in crypto. There's also obviously lots of ways to easily and quickly lose a lot of money in crypto. But that's most of my ability to, or a lot of my ability at least, to give myself runway to work on what I want to work on and whatnot is has been just generally being invested in crypto, and then just sort of like doing things in crypto that lead to making chunks of change here and there. And it's great. And I think this, sort of betting on yourself, being able to work on what you work on without even having investors or sort of like a board or whatever. I think this sort of flavor of a early part of a career is becoming maybe more popular among people in crypto for two reasons. One, that, what I just said is that, people who have happened to have been in crypto for the last, not happened like it was an accident, but, maybe it was an accident. Maybe they identified crypto as interesting and a lucrative place to be. Regardless of the combination of those two things, it's been a place where, if you've been around for a while, you've hopefully been able to make some money. And then second of all, people who are in crypto sort of by default, for the most part, like if you take someone out of crypto and you take someone who's in crypto and you take some other random person who's not in crypto, odds are you do that a few times, the people who are in crypto probably tend to value like freedom and sovereignty more than the other people who are not in crypto. And of course, like it's not like a, dead solid correlation or whatever, but just generally people in crypto, I think, sort of lean freedom and sovereignty. And so that's sort of maybe another reason as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Going back to the point about, being able to bootstrap by making your money in crypto, one of the trends on Warpcast that I'm seeing is, people launching tokens very, very early in the life cycle of the product that they're building in order to fund the early development of their product. And I'm very curious to see how that model plays out and matures, and whether it ends up being successful in the long run. I know people have often warned against launching a token early because you don't want the baggage of having a token if you decide to pivot away or drop the idea. But it seems like with the volume of tokens that are being launched, it's the expectations around launching a token are no longer as heavy. So that is just another model that I'm curious to see play out in the long run.
Yeah, that'll definitely be interesting to see. Maybe we can sort of plug back into, you were going to speak to how all of this, how you're thinking through all of this as it relates to native, and then I brought us materially off track for a while.
No, I mean, I think it's all related, right? I think one of the core theses around native is that, well, A, it's that narrative is really important. And B, I think building on that, narrative is important largely because it gives people an avenue through which they can believe in your company and believe in your worldview and the mission that you're pushing forward. And I feel very strongly that people are willing to put money up for the things that they believe in, even if it is not driving, quote unquote, utility in the short term. And I think we see this a lot in crypto, but I think these creative avenues for funding become a lot more accessible to founders if they are giving folks something that they could believe in, if they are giving folks a narrative that they can latch onto. So a lot of my work with Native is not only, how do we create a bulletproof narrative so that you can go out and, raise more money or get more leads. But more importantly, I think the optimal outcome is how can we create a narrative that people believe in so deeply that if you do go and launch that course, like a friend of mine did, or you do go and, launch some tangential product that is really meant just to fundraise the development of the primary product, people are looking at it more as a patronage play than they are as a utility play. And they're very happy to put that money up because they believe in what it is that you're building and they want to see it in the world. So I do think that if Native is successful in the long run, one measure of that is we have helped founders build networks of believers that made it possible for them not to have raised funding, whether venture or otherwise, even if they felt like they needed to early in the life cycle of their company.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting as you're talking about this sort of like patronage versus utility, or just more broadly, like sort of a expected value or expected return. It's an interesting I think it's interesting when like in all of these cases that you're mentioning, it's not like pure patronage, or at least in most cases, I would think it's not pure patronage. There's at least some chance, it seems, that there would be value from whatever this like if you're going to buy an early token, there's an understanding that like we don't, in a certain case, like we don't have a product yet, but here's what we're going to go try and build. And it's like there's not even any guarantee that if this thing works, that value accrues to the token. Like there's no guarantees of anything, so it's largely patronage, but it could be something. And I think there's something pretty powerful about like primary patronage with secondary very small odds, or not necessarily very small, but small odds of like huge upside, or just any return basically, because it becomes something that's different from like Patreon, which has sort of like a limited market. Like there's only, if someone wants to, one of my friends just texted me the other day for his niece is having a Girl Scout whatever, and I thought he sent the link by accident. I was like, why are you sending me Girl Scout cookies? But he evidently, it's his niece or whatever. So I opened the link, and I actually haven't done it yet, but I need to. I have it on my list. I got to go buy some. I don't have a list, but I have it in my head as a to-do that I got to go buy some Girl Scout cookies. And that's like a pure patronage thing, right? And like there are times and places for those sorts of things where that's not even patronage. I guess it's like sort of donation, but they're similar. And like there's times for these things, and they have like sort of nominal amounts attached to them typically, unless you like sort of really care about some cause or whatever. But what we're seeing in these situations, I feel like that you're laying out, is like it's primary patronage. Like I believe in this, I support this, I like this person who's doing this, but I'm also aware that it's kind of like a lottery ticket, that thing could, result in some value long term. And I think that's like an interesting combination, especially in crypto, where it's like it tends to be so speculative, and outcomes can be so large and like just kind of ridiculous. Not like ridiculous in a bad way, but just like 25,000x or whatever. And so it becomes like it's almost like a personal venture model in a way, where you're deciding what you want to invest in based on basically just like who you like, what you believe in, what you're interested in. Every ticket that you write is relatively small, and maybe you write 1,000 tickets and 999 end up being pure patronage, and one of them does a 10,000x, and you're up 10x on all of that, combined.
Right. And I do like, this goes back to this whole, we'll see how these builder tokens play out, because I do think that's a lot of the reason anybody is investing in these builder tokens. Most of them have no promise of utility at all. right? But they're also not quote unquote meme coins in that they don't stand for anything specific. They are essentially patronage plays, but you're hoping that if the founder ends up winning, either there is a chance that they tie the token into what it is that they're building, or B, they, the attention around that founder just causes the token to go up. And I don't think either of those are really legitimate in like the quote unquote investment sense. They're not legitimate reasons to invest, but they are like, there are definitely benefits associated with supporting the founder early. So I don't know, like I think you articulated it well, but that's definitely a dynamic that I could see biting some people in the butt, but I'm hoping the good intentions around it actually end up making it more likely to be a successful model in the long run.
Yeah, we'll see. And I think it's so early still that we haven't really seen like, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Like you said, there's at least a couple of different avenues where founders can either tie the token into their product directly, or contribute some portion of their success like back to token holders, or like any number of things. The attention thing is not necessarily under their control, but we'll sort of see longer term. Is that like a sustainable thing that tokens representing projects will increase in value and sustain that value over time just by being more successful, regardless of any utility whatsoever, just because they've sort of aggregated more sort of foundational attention? I think there's still somewhat of a question mark on that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to sort of see how it all plays out. But separately, still on native, but I saw, I think it must have been a cast as well from you that was talking about, and I know I just checked my watch and I know we're coming up on time, so we'll wrap things up relatively soon. Do you have a few minutes to go over?
Yes.
Yep. So I saw you were writing about, what was it? It was basically, I don't want to, incorrectly name it, but I think you had called it like a narrative R&D system. And it was about how you were like sort of ingesting all of these different, recordings of your calls, transcripts, and various like data, like sort of feeding that into AI and having AI help guide towards like basically make some connections and prioritize like sort of interesting things coming out of those things, just sort of like a baseline for your work and developing these narratives. Can you talk about like logistically sort of like how that works, how you've put it together? Like, was it like you set aside a day and built this system, or it's been something that's sort of like you've added different pieces over time, and sort of like how that's working for you? If it's applicable in other things other than specifically like is this a generalizable system besides for narrative R&D, which it would seem to be? And I know I'm laying like several questions on you at once, so like you don't need to answer any one in particular, but like that realm of stuff is what I'm curious about.
I'll start by saying it's definitely a work in progress. The inspiration behind it was that I, was having a lot of conversations with individual clients of mine that I felt were laddering up to the core brand and narrative of Native itself. And I wasn't doing a good job of organizing those thoughts. And I wasn't doing a good job of taking the crystallization of those thoughts and then reapplying them to the work that I was doing with individual clients. And then as a side note, I was realizing that a lot of the value of the work that I was doing from a very practical sense with clients was we were laying the foundations and basically laying the context for LLMs to get really good at producing like social media posts, right? So if you've written a pillar essay and you understand your brand positioning and you have the specific articulation of ideas down, that's when, Claude can come in and pump out 10 tweets for your brand account for the next couple of weeks that actually are really, really insightful and end up getting some good engagement and don't feel like slop. So I wanted to build a system that allowed each of the companies that I was working with to ingest all of their raw materials plus the narrative strategy work and that pillar essay that we had written for them, and just prompted in a way very naturally that led them to use this rather than using, Claude.com or ChatGPT's native interface or whatever it might be, right? So it's basically just like the way that I've described it is Claude projects on steroids. Now, I built it myself, just like me playing in Cursor. The backend database is literally Obsidian. Like, I don't have a real database. It's all in plain text. It's definitely inefficient. It's definitely not built the way that it should be built. But as of right now, it is getting the job done. And each week I'm adding, a feature here, a bug fix here. And I'm getting to the point where I feel like I have a deep understanding of what a product like this needs to include to be valuable out of the box for a founding team or a marketing team. And with the hopes that I'm going to productize this alongside, my services and basically say like, hey, if you hire native, we're going to use this system that you're going to be able to use across your entire team. And the simplest, value prop is that this is going to replace your ChatGPT and Claude use for your marketing team. And for a lot of folks, that's enough, because if I can make that experience 5 times better for them, they've replaced the need to have a junior social media person, essentially. But all of this is to say, I think high level, this idea of a narrative R&D system, I think is really important, because the work that I am doing is not static. I do, this brand positioning exercise, we produce a pillar essay, and then what comes next, it is having a pulse on what is happening in the market and then continuing to talk about your narrative and what it is that you're building in the context of the current conversation, and take what customers are saying and what the current meta is and what the current conversation is, and use that and filter it through the existing narrative so that you can produce more content and talk about your company in light of the existing zeitgeist, right? So it's basically brand as filter and brand as lens through which your customers can see the world. And if that is the approach that you're taking to narrative strategy, which I think is the correct approach, then it needs to be an active one. It cannot be passive. It cannot be static. It cannot be, hey, somebody is coming in and doing work for 2 months and then they're dipping. So building out this system, I think, is really important. And it's allowed me to both theorize about what I think narrative strategy work looks like and what effective work looks like, and also get very specific about, okay, what are the tools that we can use? What's working with the existing tools? What is not working with the existing tools? So I think just for the sake of my clients and the sake of myself, building a system like this has been valuable in making sure that I'm giving them the best work possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't realize that. I thought that this was a system that you had built like sort of for personal use. And I didn't realize that it's something that, first of all, can be like other people can plug in, and maybe they have to, configure a couple things like to have their calls recorded and fed into it or whatever it might be. But other people can sort of relatively easily plug in and then use it as, that you would productize it, that they could just use it themselves. That I thought it was a personal tool. So and obviously a lot of great products come from being personal tools at first. So seems like it could be an example of that, but that sounds like a compelling thing to offer for sure, alongside the more, bespoke services, which may be front loaded, but like you said, dynamic over time, reoccurring, maybe more than recurring on a set cadence or whatever. And just that makes a lot of sense. What was I going to say? I have one more thing. It might have escaped me. I'm sure I'll think of it in a minute. But with that, man, I really feel like I wanted to bring this thing up, but I can't come up with it. Maybe we'll do this again sometime, and I'll think of it. I'll probably think of this thing in like 30 seconds and maybe text you or whatever. But for now, I feel like that's a reasonable place to wrap. I know we've gone over on time a little bit, so appreciate you taking the extra time. And as I said at the top, it's great to go back and forth in real time, long form conversations. Just, it's not like I like Warpcast and tweeting and casting and hanging around the feed and all that. But to me, like, you know, there's a reason I've been doing podcasts for a few years now. It's just nothing beats it. And so it's been great to, you know, having respected your work and your thinking for a long time based on your casts and messaging back and forth a bit. It's great to finally do the real thing.
Agreed. I really appreciate you inviting me on. This was fun. Please, I mean, text me if you think of the question, and I'm sure we'll continue jamming. But thank you for the time.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, man. And take care. We'll talk soon.